we who try to be decent people are bombarded by some kind of moral political pressure from two sides. First, there is the worst one, of course, this anti-immigrant populist side, like why should we even allow refugees in? It's their fault, third world trouble, and so on. There are enough poor people here. They come from another civilization. It means conflict, and so on and so on. So there is all the time this pressure of we are defending our way of life, refugees are disturbing it. And it's interesting how in some radical right-wing circles, we really have already new conspiracy theories, which always fascinate me in their madness. A couple of weeks ago, the main Slovene, I'm coming from Slovenia, right-wing weekly journal, something like Slovene Time magazine, published a comment by a guy which was a ferocious attack on George Soros, the humanitarian billionaire, claiming that he is the most disgusting, despicable, and dangerous person today in the world because he is a Jew who is organizing Muslim invasion into Europe. The guy uses totally open, brutal terms like Negroid Islamist hordes are invading Europe, claiming that the Jewish plan is to destroy Christian Europe, and they are using Muslims to do it. Why do I like? I mean, don't misunderstand me, I'm horrified at it. But why do I, under quotation marks, like this fantasy? Because it goes to the end and it brings together two different levels of conspiracy theory. One is Muslim invasion of Europe, and the other is anti-Semitism. Usually we think that there is some kind of a conflict in the Middle East between Palestinians or Muslims and Jews. This theory claims this is a pseudo-conflict to delude us. In reality, even the Muslim terrorists, all of them, ISIS, it's a Zionist creation to ruin Europe. You know, in the good old fascist or Stalinist way, you know how fascists spoke about plutocratic Bolshevik plot. You bring the opposites together, they're doing this. So, not to get lost, this is one blackmail. But then, now things get much more problematic for some liberal leftists. Then there is the other blackmail, the humanitarian blackmail, like poor, suffering immigrants coming to Europe, desperate. Is Europe still Europe? Is it losing its heart? How can we see all those people suffering, and so on and so on? I basically, of course, agree with this second position. I nonetheless think there is something terribly wrong in this automatic retranslation of, I don't want to call it crisis, but whatever you call it, what's happening with refugees, into a pure humanitarian problem, which is out there from somewhere, we don't even analyze it closely. Thousands, hundreds of thousands people are coming, and it's purely a humanitarian question, do we let them in or not? I question this on all levels. First, I'm absolutely ready to admit it's even crucial that it's not simply something horrible happening in third world, or in this case in Middle East. As we say in Europe in our arrogant way, they screwed it up and now we should pay the bill, or what? Of course, Europe, but not only Europe, we are deeply responsible for it. Look at all regions of crisis where refugees are coming from northern, but not only northern Africa, Libya, and so on. We, Europeans, screwed it up with military intervention then. No ISIS, no refugees from Syria or Iraq without American intervention there, or without this global or geopolitical conflict between Russia and United States, others involved, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Iran, and so on. They are what is behind the Syrian civil war. So again, we cannot say there is a humanitarian crisis there, and it's purely our question of moral sympathy. Will we receive them? We are deeply responsible for them. First, geopolitically, and at a deeper level, economically. I mean, this brutal direct colonialism is more or less over. But economic neocolonialism is, in a way, stronger than ever. We know how big Western, and not only Western, also other powers are destroying local agriculture and so on and so on. Like, these are things we don't read a lot about them. But are you aware of what's happening now, even in some African countries where there is starvation, like Ethiopia and so on? Western companies, and in this case, happily, I'm ready to say, it's not the usual culprits, Europe and United States. It's more some rich Arab countries like Saudi Arabia and some Asian countries like South Korea and so on. They're buying gigantic parts of these countries for agricultural use, growing industrial plants and so on, and with millions of people who can be employed for the time being when production still goes on, but when there's a crisis, everything is chaotic and so on. For me, the symbol of today's world, and it's typical how we talk of all the crises, we read so little about that crisis, is the Republic of Congo, maybe one of the wealthiest countries in the world, with regard to natural resources and so on, but a non-existing country. Central government doesn't work, local warlords rule, all in direct connection with foreign companies, all their precious metals to export and so on and so on. So again, this is the situation out of which refugees are created. And now, if anything, it's getting even worse. We all sympathized, I hope so, 20 years ago with the tragedy of Sarajevo in ex-Yugoslavia, a big city of hundreds of thousands of people under siege, like in medieval times, simply circularly bombarded. Okay, but what's happening now in Aleppo is even worse in a way. It's a really big city of almost 2 million people, and at least out of egotism, we should worry more. Are we aware what kind of explosive new refugee crisis is being prepared there? So again, I buy all this. On the other hand, now comes the problematic part. I don't believe that, first, that we are the only culprits, because it's not simply us, Western Europeans, Americans, and Arabs. There is a mega class division, rich countries, poor countries, corruption, among Arabs themselves. And as some people pointed out, you cannot simply say, you know, and many left liberals enjoy this. They have a kind of a perverse pleasure. Whenever there is a crisis in a third world country, they always will in some way prove, oh, it's our responsibility. There is something so patronizing in this, as if they are even too stupid, all those Arabs or black Africans, to be really evil. If they do something catastrophic, only we are big enough, even in the direction of the evil, to do it. Let's take this case. Let's ask a simple question, which some people don't like to ask. Aren't there immediately below the big crisis region, Syria, Iraq, aren't there a couple of Arab Muslim countries who are among the richest in the world? Take Qatar, where they control their own Al Jazeera, who all the time emphasizes the plight of immigrants and so on. Qatar usually is listed among the first 3 per capita with greatest per capita income richest countries in the world. Competition is somewhere Liechtenstein in Europe, Qatar, Singapore. Okay, you know how many refugees they took? None. All of them, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, only Emirates, none. Only the poor countries are invaded by them. So I don't think this question should be taboo. Like, what's the international geopolitical game that is being played here. That's first point. Second point, so-called Muslim fundamentalism. You know, we should not simply say it's not, okay, of course, I am not condemning it in a racist way. But it's also not enough to say, okay, this is just a reaction to Western imperialism. So ultimately, again, we are guilty. Of course, it's a reaction. But listen, let me draw a parallel. Hitler was also just a reaction to brutal Western imperialism treatment of Germany after World War I. It's absolutely clear. In this sense, Western Europe, England, France were responsible for Hitler. But this doesn't mean that they were wrong to fight it afterwards. And it's the same way here. You know, Arabs were exploited, all that. But nonetheless, Muslim fundamentalism is not simply just a pure passive reaction to a difficult predicament. It's nonetheless a conscious choice. It's a certain active politics. It's a way, in a very strong sense, to react to what? To modern crisis. So for me, instead of accepting these official coordinates, on the one hand, we Western permissive society, on the other hand, bad fundamentalists, a more radical question is, what is fundamentalism today? In what sense it is generated by inner antagonisms of global capitalism? Listen, even in the United States, you probably know a simple, it's not high theory, but great book, Thomas Frank, What Happened with or in, Kansas. This is the enigma. Kansas, which was for over a century the quintessentially progressive American state, from anti-slavery campaigns and so on. In the last 30, 40 years, it became the very bedrock of new Christian fundamentalism. And so if you look at numbers of fundamentalists in the United States, they are pretty much the same in percentage, some 3-4%, as the number of radical fundamentalists among Arab countries and so on. First, we should approach the problem in this more fundamental way, not simply blaming Islam and so on. Islam is a problematic religion, but every religion is problematic. I think we are living today in an era of, I'm not afraid to speak as a leftist moral conservative, an era of ethical decay, disintegration of ethical substance, where things which were simply unimaginable decades ago can be said or done today. Let's take an example, the example of a state which boasts itself as the only island of reason in that area of the Middle East. Do you know that the highest religious authority of the army, in the army of a country there, said 2-3 months ago, I checked it with my friends, it's not a hoax, it's true, that when the army of their country occupies another land of people, soldiers have the right to rape local women there. Now you will say, who was this? ISIS. No, the big rabbi of IDF, of Israeli Defense Forces. And I mean, the Jews are, with all my disagreement with the politics of their government now, they are the ultimate people of civilization. But you see, even they are part of this decay. And so that I don't lose the thread, the first thing to do with refugees is to locate them in this global economic, ideological, political situation. The second thing is nonetheless not to make a taboo of the fact that they are not just passive victims. Okay, day by day, I mean here not refugees as such, but those among them who clearly are fundamentalists. And we should debate these issues openly. The third thing, and that's maybe the crux of the misunderstanding, why people attack me. The third point is, look, we tend to forget that we all are not just abstract free individuals, citizens of a world. We do live as part of concrete communities with certain ways of life which are focused precisely on ways of enjoyment, of how sexual relations are regulated, all that. That's very core of a community, and we are different here. So we should not avoid all these questions of, for example, Muslim Arabs entering Europe. They come with their customs. And okay, the politically correct way is to say we should leave them their customs, we have our customs, we should elevate ourselves above these differences and just take care of fundamental equality, human rights, and so on. This, I claim, doesn't work because human rights or universal values are never abstractly elevated above concrete ways of life. Like examples that you get in Germany, I write about them in my book. Over 2,000 girls per year of immigrants to Germany who go to ordinary German high schools escape from home because they were more seduced by the Western way of life, visit nightclubs, have German boyfriends, and so on. And then their families put pressure on them, like we know in what sense, and then they escape, seek refuge with the police. Do you know that they already have over 20 safe houses in Germany where these girls are provided with fake ID and so on and so on. And of course, Muslim community cries, oh, you are ruining our way of life. Let's be frank, in a way they are right. I mean, you cannot impose on a Muslim community our Western notions of freedom of women to choose their sex partners, and claim we respect your way of life. The way the family deals with a woman is the very basic component of their way of life. I'm not saying there is an easy way out here, but I'm just saying that, you see my point, that the problem is real here. The problem is real, and I think and also I know the Muslim intolerance is often exaggerated, and there is a big story of intolerance of Western people towards Muslims. But there is also the other side of the story. For example, I learned this from leftists in Berlin, in Sweden, in Denmark, and in Netherlands. Muslim communities there attacking gay parades, or when they see public display of homosexuality, and so on and so on. So you see what I mean? What I'm simply advocating, it's not, of course not, oppressing refugees on behalf of our Western standards. But I hope you admit you have to set a certain limit, and it's a difficult limit. It has to be renegotiated, like, I don't know, when a girl who doesn't want to be veiled is forced by her family to wear veil, and she comes to German police and complains. You have to decide. Do you say, no, that's their problem? Or do you say, no, we respect a certain notion of feminine freedom, their rights, we will not tolerate that. Whatever you do, it will be very painful. I'm claiming this. If we don't approach these topics openly in a public debate, we are just feeding the anti-immigrant populist racists, and we will get in 10, 20 years a terrible Europe where the predominant force will be anti-immigrant populists. So again, my point is not we are incompatible with immigrants, let's not have them in Europe. No, we can have even more immigrants. But we should absolutely talk about these problems in an open way, not ignore these problems. Ignoring these problems means you leave the space open for anti-immigrant populists, and then you have this utter catastrophe of literally divided nations where simply the liberal left's attitude is as if If you just mention these problems, they claim, no, this is anti-immigrant, Islamophobic, racism, these are pseudo-problems. No, ordinary people see these problems. And we have to also address those concerns. I'm not talking here as a right-wing populist. On the opposite, if I make a quick jump to American politics, that's why, although I know we shouldn't expect too much from Bernie Sanders, but my admiration for Bernie Sanders was that he mobilized for a progressive project precisely those ordinary, small, half-impoverished farmers, workers who ideally vote for the new populist Republican right. That's Bernie Sanders opened up the scope of the terrain for progressive cause for the left outside all this academic, LGBT, whatever, and included into it also ordinary, impoverished people who are the ideal prey of right-wing populists. For me, everything politically depends on this. We have two struggles today, one which unfortunately are not combined enough. One struggle is all the struggle against sexism and so on, gay rights, and the other struggle is the struggle for, let's call, poor people, economic struggle, third world, and so on. And the most tragic thing, I write about this in my book, is, I hope you noticed it, it's when third world countries advocate controlling women, homophobia, and so on, as part of their anti-colonialism. No, this is like the ridiculous example of this is Mugabe, who openly stands for it. But you have in Kenya, in all those countries where openly the very notion of women's rights, gay rights, is dismissed as neo-colonialist strategy of ruining their local communities, of destroying local ways of life, and so on and so on. But if this problem will not be resolved, if we will be caught in our politically correct struggle against discrimination and so on, and keeping this at a distance from basic economic social struggles, then we are doomed.